Thank you for watching our webinar, Align Budgets with Strategy, How to Build a Strategic Project Portfolio Budget with OnePlan. For more on this topic, explore our YouTube channel full of recorded videos. And don't forget to follow us on LinkedIn to keep up with event announcements and product updates.
Thank you, everybody, for showing up today. There's going to be I want to kind of emphasize before we even get started, and I'll probably repeat this. There's multiple things that you'll hear me repeat throughout this webinar, but this one is kind of key. So the topic of this, a strategic project portfolio budget, is deliberately from a certain angle on how you might go about constructing budgets for your organization, specifically starting with a strategic direction and leading through to potential investments and or projects. Budgets work. There's a classic approach to budgeting where somebody at the top declares we have X number of dollars to spend, and it rolls down to the next department and they have X dollars to spend, and then those departments break them up maybe across cost categories or across areas of emphasis. And it may or may not ever line up with projects or strategy. In this scenario, and the reverse is also true, by the way, you have a roll up from departments to higher departments to higher departments to a top line. OnePlan actually supports that budgeting process as well, and we will have a webinar on that, something around the title of capital planning or year-end planning. This webinar isn't focused on that kind of top-down or bottoms-up of rolling up of budgeting. We'll use some of the same tools, but ultimately this webinar, again, like I said, is focused on kind of aligning strategy and potential project investments with budgets. Okay. All right, so how to align budgets with strategy. I always start out a webinar, and I always want to make a nod to the fact that anybody who's done this for a long time knows that a lot of times portfolio management can kind of collapse into just a list of projects that we're working on. What are we working on? I can't decide what we're working on. Somebody from on high says, I know we have extra capacity somewhere to do what I want to do, and how do I find that? So in this particular slice, again, though, we're going to talk about OnePlan, and we're going to follow through on the kind of conceptualizing of budgets and strategy as they relate to project investments. So again, you're creating something that is more than a list of projects. It's more than a list of what you happen to be spending on each project. It's really going to be an all-up amount of spend or investment, depending on how you want to see it, tied to strategy over time, and we'll demonstrate that as we go forward. Okay. A little bit about OnePlan, as we kind of said, we're consistently recognized as a market leader by various organizations, Microsoft Project Partner Planner, our Partner of the Year, etc. Anybody that wants to kind of look into these things a little bit deeper, we're happy to support you. So conceptualizing budgets and strategy. Budgets and strategy are often disconnected. Why align them? Okay, so this maybe is kind of the key crux of this. And again, keeping in mind that we understand that the budget process may run completely independently of what you're doing in your project management or your portfolio management tool. Why are we going to even bother to align these things? And of course, the answer is very quickly. It's usually when there's a change in the marketplace, or leadership has a change in direction, or some pressure from the outside or from the board or from whatever level makes sense, where suddenly somebody is very intensely interested in how money is being spent. This can be part of an annual process and should be part of an annual process. But we recognize that what you don't want to have happen is, especially if you're working on projects, you don't want to be flat-footed. You don't want to say, oh, we don't know what we're spending our money on, or we don't know how we could make adjustments because we haven't bothered to align any of this to the strategy and your objectives. You want to be in a position where you can kind of say very quickly, this is what we're doing, this is what we're spending, and this is why we're spending it, and here's how the adjustments that we can make. And we will demonstrate all of that. Past, present, and future. I just want to orient ourselves around what we're talking about, because a lot of times these things can get blurred. People start asking about budgets versus actuals, or how we're showing benefits, or how we know what's going on. Again, for the purposes of this webinar, we are going to be looking primarily into what will happen. So we are setting strategy, objectives, and key results, measuring, how we're proceeding against those. We're setting budgets. We're not going to look at risks and schedules very much in this particular webinar. What we're also not going to look at are things like timesheets and status reports. We're not going to look at current tasks, active projects, weekly status reports, those kinds of things. So we're going to focus again primarily on managing what will happen. Strategic portfolio management as defined by Gartner. Just very quick, we're not going to dwell on this, but it is kind of relevant to this webinar. It starts out with objectives and flows through key results with measures, that tell you whether or not these results are proceeding. It can flow into projects, things like epics or features. It depends on what your organization is doing, and then from there, value streams, products, and capabilities. We're going to show, again, how to make sure we create objectives, key results, how we can kind of start initiatives, and then the budgets that go with it. What is OnePlan? The product, highly configurable, multi-purpose portfolio management project. You can see we've got these kind of 8 broad, very high-level things that we are able to do. We're just going to talk about 1, 2, and 6. So again, I kind of want to orient this webinar and make sure that everybody understands, yes, there's more that we could do. Yes, there are the things that, might be relevant to this, but we're going to focus on one particular thread today. Teams working according to their needs. The other thing that kind of is key to understanding OnePlan is that, we're a very role-based and solution-focused tool. So we're not dictating methodologies. We're not necessarily dictating the tools that go into managing work. And we are supporting people in their roles in their organizations, like leadership. We also integrate with a variety of products. We're not going to talk about this much at all in this webinar today, but a lot of times there are questions, oh, we do this over here, or we do that over here. Can we still do these budgeting in OnePlan? And the answer is yes. All right. Now we're going to move on to the demonstration. I like to get through the slides as quickly as possible and kind of move us right into the meat of what we're going to do. We're going to start out by looking at objectives and key results. We're going to then look at adding ideas and initiatives, talk a little bit about financial budgeting, and then finally portfolio modeling. Okay, objectives and key results. This is OnePlan, completely configurable navigation down the left-hand side. You can collapse this to gain more screen real estate. I am running this in high resolution for the purposes of the demonstration. Of course, if you are running this on your own monitor, you will have a lot more screen real estate to deal with. Several common aspects of OnePlan that you'll see kind of reappearing over and over. Number one, you can set columns, you can set grouping, you can filter across the top, you can create alternate views. This is all completely configurable. You can save your own views, you can ship views to other people. You can create views of type list. You can create views in a Kanban situation, in the Kanban board, and you can create roadmap. Finally, you'll see that we have this notion of dashboarding across the top as well. We have a end user configurable set of dashboards. We won't demonstrate that today, but I want to emphasize that this is here, and this reporting on OnePlan in real time, plus in scenarios, and we will see this again, in scenarios where you have more complex requirements, you are able to leverage Power BI or any other reporting tool as long as it can consume an OData feed. Okay. So I'm going to go back to the list view, kind of look at our objectives and key results. Again, everything you see is configurable, so these columns are not set in stone. They just happen to be what they are for our demonstration. Basic hierarchy of objectives and key results. Exactly, I think, what everybody would expect. If I drill in and I take a look at this and I say, okay, I would like to see the details around this particular objective. I can see that it has its own configurable workflow across the top, a configurable set of fields, including the objective itself. I can see that it may or may not have a schedule, financials, kind of key in our demonstration. In this case, item, we don't have it, but we can set a budget for the objective itself if that was what we wanted to do. We can talk about the prioritization and the key results that are underneath it. I can also, if I choose to, see this objective visually in terms of how it flows across the any kind of effort that may be underway. And of course, this in your organization, you may choose to summarize budgets in terms of projects, in which case you actually could end up with a total amount of potential investment tied back to a particular objective. And if you wanted to set the budget for that particular item and then compare the two, you could do that as well. The main point being, however, is that once you've set this objective, you are able to move through things like key results and projects and see how they impact your organization. Okay. I'm going to drill down into a key result. Same thing, you might be, unsurprised to see that we can track key results as the center of the world, see projects and epics that flow from that as well. Each key result also has its own customizable workflow. So we've set this as proposed, active, and closed, but you could set this with as many stages as you liked and approval at each stage. Also, once you are down in the key results, of course, you have configurable fields, things like budget, for example, if that was what you wanted, and you're able to track metrics as a trend over time if that's what you wanted as well. So if you were, in fact, attempting to hit a monthly budget target, you could track that, or any number of other trending metrics that you saw fit to configure. And then under the key result itself, you can see that we have ideas and projects and things like that we've associated with this. So I want to circle back and re-emphasize with this that the goal is to set your objectives and create key results that are underneath it and tie the items you will be budgeting for back to that ultimate objective. So in the event that somebody, for example, and I will circle back on this, changes their mind about what they want the organization to be doing, instead of having it be a scramble or an uncertainty about what you might want to change or what you might want to do, you're able to look at this and say, well, this was why we set up these budgets this way. We tied them back to these objectives so that we could meet these key results. Is this really what you're changing in terms of direction now? If the answer is yes, then you set up a new set of key results and a new objective. That's very straightforward. Basically come in and just create a new objective, for example. But you might also have a value-added conversation where you are able to suggest, well, are you really interested in giving that objective up? And the answer, of course, might be, well, now that I see it this way, I'm not as interested in giving things up. So objectives and key results, they basically ensure that, when we're talking about budgeting, that it's tied back to a strategy that somebody has set. So ideas, initiatives, and programs are things, I guess, that we might spend money on. We're not going to spend a huge amount of time talking about this. It's very straightforward. But if I come in and I want to take a look at this area called My Ideas, I can see a list of ideas that have been submitted potentially to turn into a project, or you could also use this to turn into a key result, for example, depending on how you wanted to configure this. Creating an idea, again, very simple. You come in, you create a new idea. You can use, and this is a recurring theme across our product, not subject to this particular webinar, but you can use a large language model we're calling Sophia, to build these ideas for you. If you want to give it a description and a prompt, you can walk through and have her supply whatever it is that you're hoping for. Anything around our use of AI that might seem devious or might seem like a claim that goes a step too far, I would encourage you to open up an actual trial of OnePlan and attempt it for yourself. I think you'll find that we're actually, if anything, underselling just how capable our AI is. Okay. Not going to talk about that in a huge amount on this particular webinar, though. So you're able to submit ideas. Again, you can kind of see across the top, we have the basics of list views and board views, depending on how you want to manage things. And of course, the cards are completely configurable and draggable depending on how you want to use these views. And we're able to kind of see things in terms of totals, if that's what we want to look at in terms of our budget. Sorry. So we've got all of the information in terms of how we could leverage budgeting in one place. Let me just go back to the list view very quickly. We have the basics of star voting. If you want to use crowdsourcing, you don't necessarily need to. I'm going to just come in real quick and take a look at the details on this. So you have slightly different workflow in this case, but again, the idea is you can configure it to whatever made sense in your environment. In this case, we don't really have a ton of financials information. We have a basic budget and what we think the benefits are, but we haven't bothered to build out a time phase budget. You could, in fact, enable that if you wanted to, and we'll show that a little bit later. The main takeaway from this is, as you are working with OnePlan, for example, on your budgeting process, you may be thinking, we need a place to keep track of all the stuff that we might do. And we want to, but we don't want to have it necessarily be in the portfolio as a project yet, or we don't necessarily want to have it be in as a feature. But nonetheless, we want to be able to leverage these items to kind of pull together scratch budgets. And we'll talk about that in a little bit when we go on to the modeler, in order to see all across the organization not only what we are doing, but what we might do and what we chose not to do. Okay. Okay, again, the fundamental idea between ideas and initiative programs, again, this is completely configurable, is to look at these things, make suggestions, and leverage them in OnePlan so they're live and can be seen and worked with across a team as opposed to in a spreadsheet where you are sitting in an environment and working individually. All right, so let's talk a little bit about budgeting itself. So I'm going to select my portfolio. And I'm going to choose a slightly different view. I'm going to come in and I'm going to say, I would like to see the financial summary for this particular portfolio. And you can see that we've summarized this by business unit. You can also see that we have roll-ups of budgets and forecasts, actuals, remaining budget, benefits, those kinds of things. The question, of course, is how do they get built? Now, in OnePlan, there are actually 3 separate ways you could come to a budget. We're going to kind of talk a little bit about one particular way, but I want to emphasize this. There are 3 separate ways you could come to a budget, and you could tie them together, or you can run each one independently and then contrast the results. So in terms of planning, you could build a project schedule and load it with resources and have the project schedules aggregated and create budgets. You could, instead of building project schedules, simply resource projects over time and have that number aggregate and show you a budget. So the difference between the two being one is centered on the schedule and the other is centered on the resource. The third mechanism for budgeting, the one we'll spend a little bit more time on today, is to start with, instead of a resource schedule or a project schedule, a cost category based schedule that can then be aggregated and presented over time. So again, the kind of key to understanding this is all 3 mechanisms of planning budgets are supported in OnePlan. All 3 mechanisms can run independently or they can be tied together, and the results of all 3 mechanisms can be kind of shown in one place and then resolved depending on how you want your process to work. So I'm going to come in, I'm just going to look at the details real quickly for this particular project schedule. Again, you can see a different workflow configured differently across the top because, of course, this is a project. Basic configurable fields running through here. Notions of prioritization, which we won't talk about. Project financials, a little bit more detailed on this, including things like ROI and benefits, estimated cost, actual cost, remaining cost. Project health, basics of trending across time, depending on what you want to look at. For example, how are you doing against budget over time? Project status, we won't dwell on that on this particular webinar, but you get the idea. So in terms of financials, this being maybe the key part, if we wanted to plan this project based on cost categories, in this case at the top level, labor, material supplies, travel expenses, drill down a little bit into basic roles, drill down into material supplies, travel expenses. We're able to do so, and again, this is completely configurable. So we supply an out-of-the-box suggestion, but this can fit whatever you want in your organization. Let me eliminate the compare to right now, just for the sake of clarity. We're able to plan a project just in terms of the cost category and when we want the money to spend. And yes, this is also completely configurable. You can set this up by month, by quarter, by year, depending on what makes sense to you. And all it is at this point a very spreadsheet-like environment where we simply type in numbers in 000,999 into a cell and plan our project this way. So, and you can see as well, of course, you can classify these things by OPEX or CAPEX, and you can get a running budget total from across the organization. Okay, so why is this interesting? This exact mechanism could be used on something that's only an idea. It could be used on a program, at a program level. It could be used at a department level, or it can be used, as we're showing here, at the project level. At the project level, this is maybe the simplest and most rapid mechanism for doing budgeting you could come up with. Much, much faster than working with resource capacity planning or with project scheduling. You get a good set of numbers that is based on your best understanding of what the future is going to look like, and it aggregates across the product. So everybody who's doing budgeting using this mechanism, automatically, the projects are all automatically aggregated together. Okay, so I want to emphasize that again. This, when we're talking about budgeting, and again, depending on where we are in our life cycle, this is by design very, very simple. We have clients that are working with this mechanism 20 to 40 years in the future. 20 to 40 years in the future, you don't necessarily want a project schedule with resources on it. You don't know what's going to be happening 20 years out. You do know you need to budget your money 20 years in the future because maybe you're selling a bond to fund some kind of project, but you want to keep it as simple as possible. And then only as your project only as the current year starts to approach, for lack of a better way to say it, do we want to suddenly do a more detailed project. So again, very straightforward by design and can stretch out into the future as far as makes sense. So I also now kind of want to say, and this is again just what we have configured in the product, we're able to compare this budget to any number of things. So in this case, forecast would be what the project schedule says. Actuals might come in from a different product. Remember, OnePlan has tons of interoperable integrations. Or you might show budget against benefits. So if I wanted to look at budget versus forecast, I can see where my variances are based on what the project schedule is. And what I'm able to do in this situation is go back and drive a conversation between the project manager and the person who's doing the budgeting. It may be, again, be a department level person doing budgeting. And then you can say, well, this is the budget. What you're forecasting is simply not going to happen, for example, and you're going to need to go adjust your project schedule appropriately. But the upshot being that, again, you've taken this very straightforward mechanism and you're able to create a budget that the project manager or their scheduler now needs to hit. And again, I'm not going to kind of dwell on it, but we could run this budget against the same additional kind of things, something coming from the resource plan or coming from the work plan as well. This forecast actually is coming from the work plan. Okay. So that's the basics of how OnePlan would handle this. I have covered a ton of ground and functionality in this in a very short amount of time. My hope is that if you're interested, you'll either contact us or you'll open up a trial. So that's budgeting, making decisions based on a complete view. We're now going to talk about modeling and optimization. I think this may be kind of one of the most important pieces. Again, because this is part of what makes an organization look responsive and on top of things. Certainly if you're working in a PMO or a strategic portfolio management office, you want to be very conscious that you don't become the department of no. You always want to be the department of here are your options. So let's talk about what Modeler is for a moment. The Modeler allows you to create a set of models based on whatever opening assumptions you want. In this case, we've created a bunch: marketing campaign assumptions, product backlog assumptions. Really what this is what kinds of investments or budgetable items you might be pulling into the model itself. So you could just take everything across the entire product or across your entire portfolio and pull that in. But most organizations end up wanting to pull in parts of what they have. They may want a model that has all current capital projects. They may want a model that has all secret projects. They may want to work with models that are based just on possible proposed projects, et cetera, et cetera. So, it depends on what the model is that you want to start with. Once you've actually built a model, you can come in and create various scenarios. So in this case, we have everything selected. That's great. We're going to do all of these projects. They're going to cost, a budget of 18 million. Well, you're able to prioritize and examine this in terms of the budget, but that's maybe not as sophisticated as you want to be. You want to be able to look at this and say, well, what if I had $10 million to spend? So I've selected scenario, the $10 million scenario. What would that look like? I've got a budget of only 7 million now. I've pushed these projects out. So I've eliminated $10 million in spend, for example. And I'm able to kind of take a look at this in terms of, okay, show me budget 1 versus budget 2. Which projects are in, which are out. Depending on how you want to configure this, you can take a look at what your spend is across each one of these things, and you're able to export these things to Excel too if you need to make any adjustments. This is all kind of straightforward and basic. We're just pulling projects in or out, and we're basically trying to line it up with a spend. But at this point, hopefully, if you're interested in this webinar and we're talking about budgeting, the thing that you should be asking is, well, that's great, but, I need to do this by quarter or by month. That is a great question. And the end result is that by selecting this budget item, we're able to see what your spend is across all of your projects or your initiatives or whatever it is that you have in, based on whatever time range you pick. So in this case, we've done it according to month, but again, you have a picker. You could do it whatever ranges you wanted. And you're able to take a look at this very quickly and see, maybe it's not that I'm going to run out of money in January, but I am wildly over budget for February, March, April, May, June, July, August. At this point, right? I mean, I would hope that, again, if you're interested in this, we should look at this and say, but what does that mean? Can I delay projects? The answer is, of course, yes. You can drag and drop and model the potential delay of projects across the top. Or again, you can come in and take a look at this various scenarios and say, what if I have a $15 million scenario? Look, now I'm actually across green all the way across. So kind of key points here that I want to emphasize in terms of budgeting. This ability to create multiple scenarios based on everything that is live in OnePlan means your group is able to respond very rapidly to changes in direction or an ask or budget cuts. You're able to come in, quickly model possible alternatives, and then go back and present them. Usually, once you present them, there will be still more changes. But the upshot of this is that each one of these things is a much, much more rapid cycle through than if you were to attempt to do this with Excel, for example. But more importantly, this includes all of the information. So whoever is making the decision can feel good that they're making this based on a complete 365-degree view of the world. And at the same time, that they are getting alternatives instead of being told, no, you can't do that, or no, you can't have that. They're simply kind of being asked to make sure that they're prioritizing their objectives and their investments, in a way that they're going to be happy with ultimately in the end. So I want to emphasize as well with this is that, whatever you do down here in the scenarios, you can play with this. You can create as many scenarios as you'd like. You're not actually impacting your actual portfolio. Yes, you're pulling that portfolio information in, but you're not going and making changes from here that somebody's going to have to come back and figure out what you did and how to unwind. You're actually able to do this kind of to one side. Again, make the kind of core decisions based around whatever changes there are, and you can come back and then say, okay, great, here's now our budget for the year. Not only did we budget, not only did we set this budget, but we also looked at 3 other scenarios. We can save those 3 scenarios. And then again, when there's a change, maybe we pull one of those scenarios back up and say, we planned ahead for this. This is what this looks like. Okay. So modeling and optimization, I think, is probably, it's OnePlan has this wonderful ability to kind of tie these objectives and key results down through to the projects that you're actually doing and show the budgets. But when you really kind of get to the point where you're needing to make finer grained decisions, where you're needing to look at things, where you might be under the gun with leadership to make some changes to how things are working, modeling is a wonderful tool for making anybody look like a hero in the organization, because it's complete and it again provides a set of options and why one option might or might not look better than another option. All right, and that was our demo. In terms of the summary, we always want to think about management as an active attempt to shape the future. People get very kind of uncomfortable with these things because they're worried they're going to be held to something they said or some commitment they made, and that's a very reasonable fear. I also have this fear, but in the end, it's not just about making a promise. It's about attempting to make things happen the way we want them to happen. And a lot of times I think people lose sight of that this is just the act of making a budget or making scenarios. We're actually kind of trying to make the future that we want materialize. OnePlan provides a comprehensive tool set to support that effort. I hope that was clear in this. And I really want to emphasize the utility of free trials and the availability to answer questions. Trials in particular, a lot of times people will make claims that seem too good to be true. We make a huge effort to create a series of trials based on configurable templates. So these are not hard-coded or anything like that. Any one of these things is completely configurable, end user configurable if you really want to go down that path. But to make sure that each one of these things you can test and see for yourself that they're real and they really work the way we claim they did. And with that, thank you for attending today. I appreciate your time. And if there are any questions at all, please, that we haven't answered already, but please feel free to get a hold of us. Thanks.